The Primarchs of his Imperium would inherit the greatest virtues of the Master of Mankind. Crafted to lead humanity into a golden era of prosperity and peace, the Sons of the Emperor are the pinnacle of human evolution. Yet with the corruption of the War Master, Horus Lupercal, the generals of the Imperium's Great Crusade would be tested in their loyalty to their father's ideals. For today, we shall elucidate those who would not stray from the light of the Emperor and defend humanity until the bitter end. The Loyalist Primarchs.
In warfare, preparation is the key. Determine that which your foe prizes the most, then sight your heavy weapons so that they overlook it. In this way, you may be quite sure that you shall never want for targets.
The Primarchs of the Emperor's Great Imperium were created to exemplify his indomitable will and peerless resolve. Each one of the Sons of the Emperor bears a gift, and each one is seen as demigods to both their respective legions and the Imperium itself. Created to bring the disparate worlds of humanity's lost brethren to the fore, reconstituting his Imperium into a united species, capable of conquering the entirety of the galaxy. Though Horus Lupercal would be chosen as War Master amongst his brothers, the title was considered for the only other son of the Emperor worthy of the title. Lion El'Jonson, Primarch of the First Legion, son of Caliban, and arguably the greatest general of the Imperium. During the scattering of the Primarchs, Lion El'Jonson would be cast to the surface of a death world. Ridden with enormous, terrifying, chaos-forged beasts, El'Jonson would survive alone for 10 years within the vast forests of Caliban. The feral child would be discovered by the Knights of the Order, a band of humans whom inhabited the small outposts of Caliban. Already a towering figure, El'Jonson would be seen as a threat by the Knights and be injured. The Knight known as Luther would prevent his execution and bring the child to the Order's fortress monastery. Luther would name the child Lion El'Jonson, translated from Caliban meaning Lion, Son of the Forest. His forename given to represent the fierce Calibanite lion, the deadliest beast that resided within the forest. As a son of the Emperor, El'Jonson would learn with incredible speed, mastering the Calibanite language within weeks of Luther's care. Forging a familial bond with Luther, the lion would demonstrate his incredible intelligence for strategy, and with only a few short years, the lion and Luther would rise through the ranks of the Order. With their exploits known throughout Caliban, the lion would propose a crusade to be waged against the beasts within the forest, with the goal of eradicating them once and for all, and for Caliban to be free of the danger they posed. Though hesitant to accept his proposal, Luther's oratory prowess would convince the Grand Masters of the Order to relent, and with the lion at the fore of the crusade, within 10 years the beasts of the forests would be exterminated. El'Jonson, fulfilling his promise, would be renamed Supreme Grand Master of the Order, igniting the first flickering flames of jealousy within Luther's heart. The lion would then demand the knightly orders outside of the influence of the Order to join him, with only the Knights of Lupus rejecting his command. The Knights of Lupus would be put to the sword, and the lion would command the entirety of the Knights of Caliban. During a ceremonial last hunt of the beasts of Caliban, scout forces of the Emperor would discover the Primarch and aid in the hunt with the Terran-born Astartes of the First Legion. The lion would be given command of his gene sons of the First Legion. The Knights of the Order who were too old to undergo the transformation to Astartes would also be genetically modified, with Luther being the first to undergo the procedure, then joining his Primarch as his most trusted ally and second in command of the Legion. A final gift from the Emperor, the lion would be given the Invincible Reason, the Imperium's first Gloriana-class flagship. The lion would discover his new legion had been fractured over their years of conquest before being reunited with their Primarch. The legion had adopted a vainglorious and prideful attitude, leading to many losses within its ranks due to reckless campaigns and strategies. The lion would test the captains of each of his legion's companies by dueling them in single combat. His enemies clad in Terminator power armor, himself without, the lion would best his sons each time and bolster respect between the Legion's Terran and Caliban warriors, even merging the Legion's Hexagrammaton and Caliban teachings to allow for cohesion within its ranks. The Lion would also lead a new crusade consisting of 20,000 of his Legion to scour the galaxy for the lost companies who had been abandoned in years past. Within a few years, the Lion's crusade had caused the number of his Legion to swell, ending his crusade with 100,000 Astartes rescued from the various corners of the galaxy. At the stronghold of Grimea, the Lion would duel the Council of Masters champion Pyrrhus Calagat, the Host of Fire. After an hour-long duel, the Lion would succeed and be proclaimed the Grand Master of the assembled First Legion Masters. Here the Lion would formalize the Legion under a new name, the Dark Angels, the title based after an old Caliban myth. And the Angels of Darkness descended on pinions of fire and light, the great and terrible Dark Angels. The Lion would also be deemed worthy of command of the 6 wings of the Hexagrammaton, the Death Wing, Raven Wing, Dread Wing, Fire Wing, Iron Wing, and Storm Wing. During the Great Crusade, the Lion would be dispatched with the 4th Expeditionary Fleet to campaign on the world of Sarosh. Unknown to the Imperium, the Saroshi people, though wishing to become members of the Imperium, were worshippers of the forces of chaos. Aboard the ship of the Invincible Reason, the Saroshi leader would confront the Lion, leading to the Dark Angels and Saroshi to engage in battle. The Saroshi would smuggle a nuclear explosive aboard the ship, which would be found by Junior Dark Angels librarian Zahariel and Luthor. Luthor would hesitate but eject the device from the ship, reducing the damage caused by its explosion. However, for allowing such a weapon to be allowed under their watch, the Lion would send Luthor, Zahariel, and 200 Dark Angels in disgrace back to Caliban, fanning the flames of resentment in Luthor and his men. As the Lion's exploits throughout the Crusade would be relayed to Caliban, Luthor would continue to stew in his exile. With the discovery of a mysterious tome on Caliban, Luthor would further degenerate from the loyal friend and warrior the Lion had known into a bitter shell of his former self. During the opening events of the Horus Heresy, the War Master would grow anxious with the knowledge that the Lion would remain loyal to the Emperor. The honor of War Master was a title contested, but all sons of the Emperor knew that the most likely candidates would be Horus or the Lion. As such, Horus needed to keep his brother from engaging him in the most crucial battles of his betrayal. Therefore, Horus would dispatch Konrad Curze and his legion of Night Lords to distract the Dark Angels. Curze would invite El'Jonson to battle on the planet of Sagualza, and once engaged in battle, he would share his preternatural gift of foresight, revealing the fate of the Dark Angels and their betrayal from within. The Lion and Night Haunter would engage, both crippled from the battle, with the Lion's throat cut and Curze's torso impaled by the Lion's sword. As the injured Primarch retreated, the Lion would demand his legion to pursue. Eventually warp-traveling through space in pursuit of the Night Haunter, the Lion would reinstate the chapter's Librarius to aid in combating the foul demonic forces within the warp. Standing in defiance of the Emperor's will, he would be confronted by Chaplain Nemiel, whom the Lion would kill for his defiance. During the height of the battle within the warp, Emissary of Tzeentch, Kairos Fateweaver, would tempt the Lion to join the forces of Chaos. Unflinching in his purpose, the Lion would reward the Chaos Demon's bargain by plunging his sword through the demon's heart. As the Invincible Reason escaped the warp, the Dark Angels would ambush the forces of Curze and his Night Lords, resulting in the Angels taking the remaining fledgling Night Lords prisoner, including their first captain, Sevatar. However, Konrad Curze would sneak into the Invincible Reason and for months elude the patrol sent to find him within the ship. Even the Lion would attempt to catch the Night Haunter, but to no avail, with the Night Lords prisoners eventually escaping and retreating into the void. With the arrival of the Ruin Storm and the blotting out of the Astronomicon in the later stages of the heresy, the Lion realized that travel to aid in the defense of Terra would become impossible. Instead, the First Legion would pursue the light of the alien device known as the Pharos and travel to the Ultramar capital of Macragge. Regrouping with Primarch Roboute Guilliman of the Ultramarines 13th Legion and Primarch Sanguinius of the 9th Legion's Blood Angels, With the galaxy torn in two, the three Primarchs would establish the Imperium Secundus, with the Lion serving as its Lord Protector, a moniker alike to Horus Lupercal's title of War Master. This meeting would be marred by the escape of Konrad Curze onto Macragge, wreaking havoc throughout the ultramarine homeworld. The Lion and Guilliman would be led into a trap by Curze as he detonated the chapel harboring his salvation on top of the Primarchs. Their deaths were prevented by the intervention of Iron Warrior Barabbas Dantiok and Imperial Fist Alexis Pollux using the Pharos device, teleporting the Primarchs to Sofa. Feeling responsible for the mayhem caused by Curze, the Lion would relentlessly hunt down the Night Haunter with the aid of his Dreadwing of the Hexagrammaton. Eventually finding Curze, they would battle again, resulting in the Lion ripping Curze's power pack from his armor and breaking his spine. Konrad Curze would be brought to Sanguinius and Guilliman and stand trial. A rift had been created between the Lion and Roboute, their relationship strained with the Lion's use of his legion commanding martial law during the pursuit of Curze. Curze would further add salt to the wound by claiming that the Lion had orbitally bombarded Macragge in direct violation of Roboute's orders. The Lion would attempt to kill Curze there and then, until Roboute would break the Lion's sword. Sanguinius would end the triumvirate with the Lion being banished from Imperium Secundus. Sanguinius would resolve to kill the Night Haunter until the Lion would intervene, seeking to keep Curze as his jailer and use the Night Haunter's visions of the future to his advantage. The Primarchs would brave the Ruin Storm in order to reach Holy Terra. Guilliman and the Lion would fight side by side in their efforts to distract the garrison of Horus Lupercal's forces so that Sanguinius might breach their blockade and reach Holy Terra. They would succeed, with the Great Angel taking Curze as his prisoner before the assault on the blockade. As the Primarchs parted ways and with the Astronomicon becoming dark, travel to Terra would become impossible. The Lion would instead purge the traitor homeworlds of Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's Children, and Mortarion, Primarch of the Death Guard. The worlds of Chemos and Barbarous would be left as no more than rubble. With time, the Lion would learn of the Emperor's fate, Sanguinius' death, and the near destruction of the Imperium's forces during the Siege of Terra. Stricken with grief and nihilistic guilt, the Lion returned to Caliban. Unaware that the men he had left to garrison the planet from threats would soon turn against him, Luther would command his men to fire upon the returning fleet. The Lion would learn of Luther's betrayal and the poisoning of his legionnaires' minds stationed on Caliban. To rid his homeworld of chaos corruption, the Lion would orbitally bombard Caliban. With the planet burned and its defenses crippled, the Lion would lead a force to the planet's surface. The fallen Dark Angels would be cornered inside the Fortress Monastery, where the Lion would confront the now chaos-corrupted Luther. They would duel, with Luther now empowered by the forces of chaos. He was a match, even for the Lion. With a psychic attack, Luther would wound the Lion, and with his primal desire to best his former friend sated, the corruption that had consumed him would subside. Stricken with guilt, Luther would relent and allow the secretive Watchers in the Dark to retrieve their Primarch's body. Shortly thereafter, the forces of chaos would summon a warp storm to destroy Caliban. The Dark Angels would imprison Luther and vow to destroy the traitor fallen angels whom had betrayed their kin. With the destruction of Caliban, the First Legion would salvage the debris of the planet and transform it into a vast spacefaring vessel. Both homeworld and flagship, they would name it the Rock. Housing deep within its core their prisoner of the fallen, Luther, and deeper still, the body of Lion El'Jonson, held in stasis until his body would recover enough for him to lead his legion once again and bring the vengeance of his angels back to the galaxy.
The measure of true glory is not to give battle in the bright noon of war, surrounded by brave comrades upon the field of victory, but to valiantly fight on alone in the darkness, with no hope of aid or even remembrance, and to spit defiant in Midnight's eye. Warriors of Chogoris, brothers of the great tribe, the Star Hunt calls you. Do you not hear it? The battle's red edge is your home, the respect of your kinsman your half. Plunge into the enemy's breast like a blade, cut out his heart, and you will know fulfillment. The Emperor has given us strength. In return, we give him victory.
Of all the sons of the Emperor, a select few have always been viewed with disdain by their brothers. For the Primarchs are the greatest living beings of the Imperium, with exception to the Emperor himself, and their influence across the galaxy molds the Imperium's children to follow. While some are hewn into statues proclaiming their virtues on Imperial worlds, and the fallen Primarchs are worshipped by fell demons, there is one who has always been regarded with suspicion and never truly understood by either loyalist or traitor. Seen by most as a barbarian, this Primarch would in his solitude prove to be well-cultured and intelligent, but keep his intentions and traits closely guarded to prevent them from being exploited. Jaghatai Khan, Primarch of the 5th Legion and Great Khan of Chogoris. During the scattering of the Primarchs, Jaghatai would land on the planet of Chogoris, a fertile world filled with vast plains of grass, snow-topped mountains, and vast oceans. The planet was ruled by the Palatine, a feudal aristocrat whom led his vast armies to dominate the planet. However, there was a land to the west of the Palatine that he would leave wild, the Empty Quarter, a barren grassland with little in resources or value, inhabited by nomadic tribes whom fought amongst themselves for their ancestral lands. This is where Jaghatai would be found by a man by the name of Ong Khan, chieftain of the small tribe of the Talaskas. Seeing the child as a gift from the gods, Ong would see the fire in Jaghatai's eyes, the mark of a great warrior. Ong was hated by the other tribes of the Empty Quarter for his visions of a united tribe of the downtrodden people of the Empty Quarter. One day, the tribes would kill Jaghatai's adoptive father for his ideals. Even as a boy, Jaghatai was without match as a warrior amongst the men of the Talaska tribe, and he would gather his fellow tribesmen to seek vengeance against his father's killers. The Kurayed tribe would be slaughtered, not only the men, but the women and children as well. Jaghatai would cleave the head from the tribe's chieftain and mount it to his sleeping tent. The slaughter would forge Jaghatai into a fiercely ruthless yet loyal warrior. With his father's death avenged, Jaghatai would swear to unite the people of the Empty Quarter as one tribe and bring an end to its constant infighting. Fighting hundreds of battles for years, Jaghatai would assimilate the warring tribes into the fold, making military service mandatory for all who joined, while splitting the tribe's people amongst themselves to weed out blood feuds and differences within its people. 10 years later, the Khan would travel to his winter settlement and be set upon by the Palatine's hunting bands, led by its emperor's son. Jaghatai would kill the men, leaving one mutilated rider to bring the Palatine emperor the severed head of his son. Enraged, the Palatine would gather a gigantic army to destroy the tribes of the Empty Quarter, but ultimately underestimate Jaghatai. His heavily armoured soldiers bested by the Khan's more mobile warriors and archers, the Palatine would retreat, leading to the tribe elders to confer the title of the first Kagan, or Khan of Khans, to Jaghatai. As Jaghatai would continue his conquest, he would recruit soon-to-be legendary members of his future legion, including Kinja, Hasik, and Targatai Yesuge. Besieging the cities of the Palatine, the Kagan would give its inhabitants two choices: surrender or die. Jaghatai would eventually reach the palace of the Palatine. He would demand its emperor's head on a pike from the city, which its inhabitants would willingly oblige. Jaghatai would adorn it on his tent, exactly as he had done to his father's killer 2 decades before. Within 2 years, Jaghatai had conquered Chogoris' largest empire in its history and ended all wars upon the planet's surface. 6 months later, the Emperor would arrive on Chogoris, along with the 16th Legion of Astartes, the Lunar Wolves, and their Primarch, Horus Lupercal. Jaghatai would instantly perceive the Emperor's might, and conclude that his dream of a united species amongst the stars would be possible, even if the Emperor would be at its helm, and not himself. Jaghatai would resign his position of master and become a servant of the Emperor's will, dropping to one knee and swearing fealty to the Emperor and his Imperium. Considering that rejection of the Emperor's will would lead to his people's annihilation, and seeing the Lunar Wolves present, reasoned that these indomitable warriors would soon mirror his own should he swear loyalty to the Imperium. Jaghatai would also hand over the shackles of mundanity that statesmanship required and would revel in his duty to the Imperium of waging war and hunting the enemies of humanity. Soon he would be given command of his legion, then known as the Star Hunters. Jaghatai would overhaul his Terran-born son's tactics, implementing his Chigoran-learned strategies of speed and maneuverability to best his foes. As the Imperium was desperate for the fighting prowess of all Primarchs, Jaghatai would be sent straight into the maw of conflict, with the war against the Nephilim resulting in Jaghatai renaming his sons of the 5th Legion. The Legion would conduct a ritual at the empty quarter of Chagoras, known as the Blooding. 50,000 sons of the Khan would take up blades and cut a mark on the flesh of their faces, inflicting scars that would also herald their individual renaming as Sons of the White Scars. With further battles waged during the Ulanor crusade against the Orc hordes, Jaghatai would earn a reputation within the Imperium as a truly deadly warrior. Rogel Dorn and Rabute Guilliman would object to the Khan's swift induction into the theatre of war, believing the Primarch to lack true understanding of the Imperium's values and culture, leaving him ill-prepared to integrate into the wider Imperium. Though the Khan did have strong bonds with some of his brothers, notably Horus Lupercal and Magnus the Red of the Thousand Sons, as the first Primarch to meet the Khan, Horus would revel in their shared exploits and respect for one another as warriors, whilst Magnus was an outsider to his brothers just like the Khan and shared a kinship for the pursuit of knowledge. It was therefore tragic that his most erstwhile brothers would one day be his enemies. With the beginning stages of the Horus heresy, Horus would turn to Jaghatai for his allegiance. However, his loyalty to the Emperor was unbreakable, and the Khan would stay his hand. Jaghatai would not dive into the conflict, instead waiting patiently for information to be relayed to him. Even when being petitioned for aid by Leman Russ of the Space Wolves to combat the traitor forces of the Alpha Legion, the Khan would receive conflicting reports from several legions, but wisely not involve himself until he knew the truth of the events that had unfolded. Seeking answers, the Khan would receive urgent orders from Rogel Dorn himself, requesting for the White Scars to immediately travel to Holy Terra to aid in its defense. The Alpha Legion would blockade his passage, presenting themselves neither as friend or foe. The Khan would assess their ruse, realizing their actions sought to sow doubt in his mind, keeping the White Scars immobile and neutered in the wider war that was waging. The Khan's fleet would confront the Alpha Legion blockade, which would result in the Alpha Legion firing on their vessels. The 20th Legion, renowned for their secrecy, would be bested by the Khan's cunning, and the White Scars would push past the blockade and travel into warp space, their destination unknown. The 5th Legion would find themselves at Prospero, its surface scorched to the consistency of burnt charcoal. On the surface, the Khan would speak with an apparition of his beloved brother, Magnus the Red. He explained that he had tried to warn the Emperor of Horus's betrayal, but was punished for his intervention. When pressed for his allegiance, Magnus would reveal his opposition to the Emperor, and the Khan would stand with the Imperium. Feeling a presence that had haunted him since Ulanor, the Khan would witness a spear of light pierce the sky of Prospero, summoning the Primarch of the Death Guard, Mortarion. The Primarch of the 14th Legion would implore the Khan to join Horus's traitor legions. Noticing the physical changes to his brother, the Khan would warn Mortarion of further changes that might befall his legion should he continue to pursue his corrupted path. Mortarion would brush aside his warnings, and with the Khan's refusal to join the traitors, the two Primarchs would duel. Their battle would end in stalemate, with the cowardly Mortarion retreating before the battle could be finished. With his interactions between Magnus and Mortarion concluded, Jaghatai had finally deduced the extent of the traitorous intent of Horus Lupercal's rebellion. Resolving to aid his brother Primarch Rogel Dorn in the defense of Terra, the Khan would utilize the Dark Glass, a relic from the Dark Age of technology recently discovered by rogue traders. White Scar veteran Targutai Yusuge would sacrifice his life to power the relic and allow the Khan to travel to Terra. Meeting with Rogel Dorn, Sanguinius and Malkador the Sigillite, the assembled protectors of Terra would devise their strategy to combat the incoming traitor forces. With the full force of chaos assaulting the Imperial Palace, Jaghatai Khan would aid the beleaguered defenders of the throne by recovering the vital Lionsgate spaceport from traitor forces using his strategies of lightning-fast raid tactics, reclaiming the spaceport in a tremendous single strike. Jaghatai would also lead his 300-strong Jetbike battalion to assault the Colossi Gate with support from Blood Angel Captain Ralderon and Adeptus Custodes commander Constantin Valdor. This retaliation would be halted by the arrival of the Death Guard, with the now fully chaos-corrupted Primarch Mortarion dueling Jaghatai once again. Their rematch would prove that Jaghatai was no match in strength for the now empowered Primarch of the 14th Legion. However, the Khan understood the psychology of his brother and baited him with barbed words and insults that played to his neuroticism. Overextending Mortarion, he would reveal a weakness for the Khan to exploit. As Jaghatai was impaled by Mortarion's scythe, the Khan would behead his former brother, casting his soul into the warp. After recovering from his wounds, and with the Horus heresy quashed under the heel of his Imperium, Jaghatai Khan would return to Chagoris. Finding that the Dark Eldar had made several raids on his homeworld, the Khan would hunt down the Drukhari, even pursuing his charge into the Webway to bring an end to their foul deeds. To which he has since not returned, though it is said amongst the veterans of the White Scars that the Great Khan will one day return to his legion, in the time of their greatest need, and bring righteous fury to the enemies of his Imperium.
It is not enough to take from an enemy their life. Rather, take from them also their places of safety, their allies, their homes, and their loved ones. Crush all those in their care. Lay their chattels to waste, and then drive them alone and naked into the darkness. Take everything they have and burn it for the mere pleasure of seeing the ash crackle between your fingers, and call it nothing more than a beginning. There are those who undervalue the penal battalions, but they should consider this: should a man who has wronged the Emperor be allowed to wrong him further? For each man executed is a man who can no longer serve, and to fail in service to the Emperor is the greatest of sins.
Loyalty is a trait that defines the heroic Primarchs who refuse the temptations of chaos. Each Primarch weighed the cost of betraying their Imperium by clashing blades and bolters with their brothers. For some, the Imperium would be secondary, yet compatible of their true allegiances, whilst for others their allegiance to the Emperor would be unshakable. But there is only one Primarch whose loyalty is truly ironclad, with no hesitation to reject the poisoned chalice of chaos. Though seen by many of his brothers as a butcher of men, he would nonetheless be the Emperor's greatest executioner and loyal servant, the Wolf King of Fenris, Leman Russ. The young Primarch would land on the icy death world of Fenris, his incubation pod plummeting into the flank of a vast mountain. Despite the harsh weather, the infant would be found by a she-wolf, a gigantic Fenrisian thunderwolf. Despite its ferocious nature, the wolf would nurture the child and raise it within its wolf pack, a third child to raise alongside its own children, the male wolves, whom would be known as Freki and Geri. During the season of Hellwinter, the child and the wolf pack would scavenge for food within the territory of Thengir, king of the Rus. Escaping with their food, the king would send a raiding party after the wolves, armed with poisonous arrows and blades of sharpened steel. The child would attempt to defend them, being injured trying to protect his adoptive mother and killing dozens of men with his bare hands. The she-wolf would die, but the tribesmen of the Rus would realize the creature bearing its fangs to be a small boy and lower their weapons. The child would be led to their king, and with his brothers Freki and Geri at his side, the chieftain would see great potential in the young boy and order him to be given a place within his household. The boy would learn to laugh and to sing and understand his human traits. Even at such a young age, he would learn to speak and master the battle techniques of axes and swords. With this, he would be named by the king Leman of the Rus. His exploits would be legendary on Fenris, said to battle entire armies of rival tribes alone, to uproot great oak trees with his bare hands, and to even wrestle the gigantic Fenrisian mammoths of the wilds. With time, the aging king would die, leaving the Rus alone as his successor. Under the rule of their new Wolf King, the people of Fenris would thrive, the Russ's deeds even reaching the scouting parties of the Emperor of Mankind. Recognizing these incredible feats to be those of his son, the Emperor traveled to Fenris and disguised himself to venture into the court of the Russ. Meeting Leman, the Emperor would challenge the youth to 3 trials. Knowing the proud Russ would not bend his knee without proof of his acumen, the Wolf King would decide the nature of the challenges. First, the two would indulge in an eating challenge. The Emperor would eat more than any man at the Russ's table, save for the Wolf King. For the second challenge, the two would drink, and by the time the Emperor had drunk his 6th barrel of Fenrisian mead, the two would conclude that there was no more mead to drink. The Wolf King would drain every ounce of alcohol within the feast hall. Failing both challenges, the Emperor would grow angry, decrying the Wolf King as a drunkard and a glutton, unable to achieve anything more in life with exception to stuffing his face and bellowing hollow boasts of glory. The Russ would declare his final challenge, drawing his sword from its scabbard. They would face each other in combat, the Emperor throwing his disguise to one side and revealing the splendor and glory of his power armor. The Emperor would not lose, and within an hour of being knocked unconscious by the Allfather's power glove, Leman would admit defeat and swear fealty to the Emperor, with a broken fang jutting from his bloodied smile. Under the tutelage of the Emperor, Leman would learn of the Imperium's star-spanning technologies, understanding the finer points of High Gothic, and earning the Emperor's approval to engage in the Great Crusade. He would meet the only other brother to so far be found during the Scouring, Horus Lupercal. Horus would see his new brother as a savage and treat him with jealousy masked as disdain. But the Russ would nonetheless seek to ease tensions between himself and his brother. Leman would then be given command of his legion, the Space Wolves, and gifted his thrice-blessed suit of power armor and the legendary Frostblade, Mjolnir. Forged with the teeth of the great Kraken of Fenris, the blade was said to be strong enough to cleave its ice mountains in 2. During the Great Crusade, Leman Russ would gain a reputation as a cunning and fierce warrior. Whilst fighting the Wheel of Fire campaign, the Space Wolves would lose a third of their legion's numbers to the onslaught of orcs. Yet for his efforts, the Russ would be rewarded with the fortress monastery known as the Fang to be built on Fenris. He would also be gifted the Spear of Russ, forged by the Emperor's own hand, which had previously been known as the Dionysian Spear. Though Leman would see little of the Emperor during the Great Crusade, he would be mentored and tempered by Malcador the Sigillite's wisdom, forming between them an unshakable bond. Due to his fiery temper and boisterous personality, the Russ would inevitably clash with his brother Primarchs. During the Doolan campaign, the Space Wolves would fight alongside the Dark Angels. The Doolan planet's leader would verbally insult Leman Russ, stoking his rage, and leading him to vow to kill him personally. As the two legions besieged the throne room, Leman would burst through the doors at the moment where Lionel Johnson, Primarch of the First Legion, would behead the planet's ruler. Denied his retribution, Leman Russ would demand penance from the Lion for his lost honor. The Lion would refuse, leading to the Primarchs to brawl for an entire week without pause. On the 7th day, the Russ would realize the immaturity of their actions and laugh uncontrollably. With the Lion seeing this jest as a mockery to his honor, he would use the opportunity to strike the Russ unconscious. And as the Primarch was roused from his dormant state, the First Legion would leave the system, fueling a feud between the legions which would last into the millennia to follow, with both chapters adopting the custom of their chosen champions dueling for the honor of their Primarchs. Leman Russ would also be sent to retrieve Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters, to be brought before the Emperor. The Red Angel had sought to implant his legions Astartes with the Butcher's Nails brain implants, to which the Emperor would demand him to relent, sending his most loyal son to bring Angron to justice. On Malkova, the two Primarchs would clash. The Russ would restrain his martial prowess as he was instructed to by the Emperor, However, this restraint would lead to the Russ being bested by the Red Angel, and his legion would undergo the foul surgeries of the Butcher's Nails. Despite his many rivals, Leman was regarded with respect by some of his brothers, particularly Roboute Guilliman, who saw Leman as one of 3 other Primarchs who always served the Emperor's will with utmost conviction, the others being Rogel Dorn, Sanguinius, and Ferrus Manus, regarded by Guilliman as the Dauntless Few. Guilliman even proposed that his legion of the Ultramarines could win any war outright if only one of those Primarchs, including the Russ, fought beside him. Though as the Great Crusade came to a close, Leman Russ would earn a nickname within the inner circle of his brother Primarchs, the Emperor's Executioner. During the Horus Heresy, Magnus the Red would defy the Emperor's decree of the Treaty of Nicaea. Attempting to warn the Emperor of the betrayal of Horus Lupercal, Magnus would irrevocably damage the Emperor's Webway project, flooding the Webway with demons and dooming humanity to continue traversing the ever-deadlier warp and incur its wrath for millennia. Sent by the Emperor, Russ would be tasked with bringing Magnus to Terra to face judgment, but be manipulated by orders from Horus Lupercal. His orders now stating to eliminate the Sons of Magnus. Prospero would burn, and the Thousand Sons would be decimated, but Magnus would nonetheless escape into the warp. Leaving Prospero, the Space Wolves would be forced into a rout by the Alpha Legion, taking shelter in the Alaxis Nebula. Surrounded and abandoned by the White Scars Legion when called for aid, Russ would confide with Bjorn the Fell-Handed, stating that blindly serving the Emperor as his executioner was a grave mistake. Vowing to forge his own path, Leman Russ would lead his forces in a desperate last stand against the 20th Legion. The Space Wolves would be saved, begrudgingly by the Dark Angels, and return to Holy Terra. During his time on Terra, Russ would aid Malcador and the Knights Errant in planning the assassination of Horus Lupercal. Dorn and Sanguinius would implore Russ and his legion to stay on Terra to defend against the oncoming traitor forces, but Leman would resolve to kill Horus himself. With the aid of the Knights Errant, Russ would track the location of the vengeful spirit and prepare to duel Horus Lupercal. With the aid of his rune priests, the Russ would look for a weakness in the War Master by travelling to the Underverse, known by the Imperium as the Warp, and venture to Surtur's Door. The Russ would confront the Earl King, a warp entity that collected the souls of Fenrisians who die outside of battle. Before he could be consumed by the Earl King's Vulfan, Leman Russ offered to complete one of 4 tasks in exchange for his soul. Accepting his terms, the Earl King challenged Leman to drink the damned soul of Amarok's bowl until it was dry. Second, he would wrestle an ancient crone, and finally, move the Earl King's great slumbering wolf. Leman Russ had failed all challenges, but for his 4th, he would need to explain what the challenges he had attempted to accomplish really were. Russ assessed that the bowl represented the changing seasons of Fenris, the old crone was a manifestation of age, and that the wolf was death. The chamber crumbled, and a mirror of Russ dressed in finery would reveal the secret of the Dionysian spear. It held a portion of the Emperor's power and could illuminate the truth to those who were pierced by its tip. The false Russ would impale Leman with the spear, revealing the true nature of the Primarchs. Despairing for a time, Russ would nonetheless emerge from Surtur's Door, with the knowledge that he had the capacity to end the war should he win his duel with Horus. With the aid of his Wolf Lords, Leman Russ would ambush the vengeful spirit and confront Horus. Offered to join the traitors, Russ flatly refused Horus's offer and fought the War Master. Allowing a chance for Horus to wound him with his lightning claw, Russ would use this feint to impale Horus with the Spear of Russ. However, due to a moment's hesitation, his strike would land, but not be fatal. Badly wounded, Russ would be dragged from the battle by Bjorn the Fell-Handed and Grimnar Blackblood, as hundreds of space wolves swarmed the War Master. Russ would fall into a comatose state as Abaddon the Despoiler pursued the depleted space wolves to the Yarant system. With the aid of Ravenguard Primarch Corvus Corax, the Space Wolves would manage to escape the Yaren system, with Leman Russ passing on the Dionysian spear to Bjorn. The Russ would not be present for the Siege of Terra, and would not return until well after the entombing of the Emperor on the Golden Throne. Returning to Fenris one last time, Leman Russ would host a great feast, then address his sons before embarking into the Eye of Terror.
Listen but closely, brothers, for my life breath is all but spent. There shall come a time far from now when our chapter itself is dying, and as I am now dying, and our foes shall gather to destroy us. Then, my children, I shall listen for your call in whatever realm of death holds me, and come I shall, no matter what the laws of life and death forbid. At the end I will be there, for the final battle, for the Wolf Time.
This tale would be retold every 1,000 years by Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the now Great Wolf of Fenris. The Space Wolves would on occasion scout the galaxy in a great hunt in search for their Primarch, but to this day, to no avail.
There is no enemy. The foe on the battlefield is merely the manifestation of that which we must overcome. He is doubt, and fear, and despair. Every battle is fought within. Conquer the battlefield that lies inside you, and the enemy disappears like the illusion he is.
Virtue is often attributed unto the Primarchs of the Imperium. For it is true that many of the Emperor of Mankind's sons imbue their legions with their greatest traits, inspiring their sons with ideals such as heroism, loyalty, bravery, and sacrifice. Though of all the Primarchs there is only one synonymous with righteousness, symbolizing the Imperium's truth, fortitude, and valor. Primarch of the 7th Legion of Adeptus Astartes, Rogal Dorn. During the scattering of the Primarchs, Rogal Dorn would land on the death world of Inwit within the system of the same name. Caught in the gravitational pull of a dying star, half of Inwit's surface would be blanketed in perpetual darkness, with the other illuminated by faded sunlight. Dorn's capsule would be discovered by an ice cast native to the ice hives of the world. The patriarch of the House of Dorn would raise the Primarch as his grandfather, teaching him tactics and survival skills. When Rogal Dorn eventually discovered that his grandfather was not a blood relative, he still held his memory in high regard, keeping a fur-edged robe that belonged to him, blanketing his bed with each night that he slept. Inwit bred hardy people as the planet bore little of value, but Rogal Dorn would lead his caste, reaching other planets for greater resources and unifying the system's people under the Inwit Empire, with Rogal Dorn becoming its emperor. The Primarch would also discover a ship within the orbit of his homeworld, the Phalanx. A colossal vessel constructed during the Age of Technology, Dorn would spend years trying to reactivate it. Within 40 years of the death of his adoptive grandfather, Dorn would be discovered by the Emperor of Mankind and his Imperium. As the 7th Primarch to be found by the Emperor, Rogal Dorn would meet with him at the helm of the Phalanx. Returning the vessel to his father's care, Rogal Dorn would bend the knee to the Imperium, and the Phalanx would become the Imperial Fist's fortress monastery. Dorn would from this day remain fiercely loyal to the Emperor, becoming an exemplar of the truth. He would never tell a lie and be a staunch defender of the Imperium. Commanding his legion and expeditionary fleets with both military genius and peerless devotion to the task set forth by the Emperor, Dorn would be compared to his brother Primarchs due to his similar traits. Bearing the same discipline as Guilliman, the bravery of the Lion, and even revealing moments of reckless zeal akin to the Khan or the Russ. Horus Lupercal would even state that a fortification held by Dorn's legion of the Imperial Fists could stave off his own legion of the Lunar Wolves in an endless stalemate should the conflict ever occur. Tasked by the Emperor with constructing the capital homeworld of Holy Terror's Imperial Palace, Dorn would forge a magnificent fortress, which would prove crucial in time for the upcoming betrayal. As the Imperial Fists were recalled to Holy Terror, the Horus Heresy would ignite the flames of betrayal. Warp storms would impede the 7th Legion's journey to Terra, allowing fate to cross Rogel Dawn's path with the escaping Death Guard battle captain Nathaniel Garrow and his ship of Loyalist forces aboard the ship known as the Eisenstein. As Garrow relayed his news of Horus Lubical's betrayal, Dawn would barely contain his rage, almost ending the life of Garrow, believing his words to be heretical lies. With the intervention of Remembrancer Mercedes Olaton and her cortical implants, Dawn would see with his own eyes the tyranny and butchery of his brother Primarch, as his forces massacred their detachment of Remembrancer historians, poets, and artists. Dawn would dispatch the majority of his legion to combat the rebellious factions in an attempt to quash Horus's plans before he had amassed a sizable force. Returning to Holy Terra, Dawn would inform the Emperor and his subjects of the events that were transpiring personally. The Emperor would declare Dawn as the Lord Commander of the Imperium, charged with fortifying the Imperial Palace's defences. Dawn would assume command of the Imperium, whilst the Emperor managed the war within the Webway and his project to end the Imperium's reliance on warp travel. Whilst Malcador the Sigillite dealt with the politics of the Imperium, Dawn would divide the Sol system into several spheres of defence, attempting to contain the traitor advance and split their forces. With the beginning of the 31st millennium, Horus would enact his invasion of the Sol system. With Mars and the moon of Luna under attack, Dawn would helm the Phalanx and engage the traitor forces. Mercedes Olaton would travel to the station with urgent news of the traitor forces' actions, only to be revealed as corrupted by the demonic being known as Samos. Bringing with it demonic forces of chaos, Dawn would engage with the foul beings and continuously kill Samos. However, the demon would be reborn until Mercedes Olaton would take her own life, closing the portal from which the demons had emerged. With the Sol system falling to traitor forces, Dawn would return to the Imperial Palace to command the defenders of the throne. Leading the forces of the Bab Bastion and Sky Fortress, Dawn would forbid his Primarch brothers Sanguinius and Jagatai Khan from leaving the palace walls, intending to slowly bleed the forces of Horus with a protracted siege, buying time for the arrival of Abute Gilliman's fleet of Ultramarines to turn the tide of battle. Dawn would relent when realizing the Ultramarines would not arrive in time, giving permission to Sanguinius and his Blood Angels to lead a counterattack from the Helios Gate. Dawn would position one of his lieutenants, Fafnir Ran, to defend the Lions Gate spaceport, and his most fearsome son, Sigismund, would engage the World Eater forces, aiding in the defense of the spaceport, only to be bested by his former friend, Khan. Dawn would save Sigismund's life, swatting away the chosen warrior of the Chaos being known as Khorne. Despite his stalwart defense, the Lions Gate would fall, threatening the integrity of the Colossi, Saturnine and Gorgon gates, imperiling the Eternity Wall spaceport. The Loyalist forces had the numbers to only protect 3 of these key structures, with Dawn deciding to abandon the spaceport. Dawn would set a trap at the Saturnine Gate, and at the height of the skirmish, clash blades with his brother Primarch, Fulgrim. Dawn would best his brother in combat, but the wounds he dealt would be instantly healed by Fulgrim's Chaos-born powers. Fulgrim would tire of the battle and retreat, sending his elite honor guard led by Lord Commander Eidolon to kill Rogel Dawn. With Sigismund's aid, they would survive the onslaught, and for the next 3 months of the siege, Dawn would not sleep or rest for a moment. Even for a Primarch, his superhuman body strained to exhaustion. Jagatai Khan would insist that he should lead a charge to retake the Lions Gate spaceport, which Dawn would allow. The Khan would not return from the spaceport, Dawn believing him to be lost. In a last-ditch effort to end the war, Dawn, Sanguinius, and the Emperor of Mankind would assault Horus Lubical's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. Dawn would be separated from the Emperor and Sanguinius during the assault. Later, he would find his brother's corpse and his father fatally wounded. Receiving his final instructions from the Emperor, Dawn would carry the Angel and his Emperor back to Terra. Interring the Emperor unto the Golden Throne, Dawn would feel the weight of guilt bear down on him. Failure now scarred him, and the Primarch would inflict suffering upon himself with a device known as the Pain Glove. The pain revealed to him visions that his legion would need redeeming as penance for his failure to protect his Imperium. Seeing an opportunity, Dorn would assault the Iron Cage, a gigantic fortification built by Perturabo and his Iron Warriors to mock the fighting capability of the Imperial Fists. Dorn would rise to the challenge and spend weeks attempting to conquer the labyrinthine fortress. With the end of the battle near, it is uncertain as to which legion would survive. Regardless, Rabute Guilliman would intervene, causing the Iron Warriors to retreat into the Eye of Terror. The Imperial Fists had suffered catastrophic losses during the battle, but nonetheless redeemed themselves in their duty to spill the blood of traitors to the Imperium. The remainder of the 7th Legion was split into successor chapters, including the Black Templars and Crimson Fists, and for the next 20 years, Dorn would continue to split his legion into Codex Astartes compliant chapters. The final record of Rogal Dorn would soon follow, with the Primarch engaging in battle with a Chaos Fleet despoiler-class battleship known as the Sword of Sacrilege. Leading a desperate attack on the ship's bridge, the Primarch's fate would be unknown, with his sons recovering only a severed hand from the aftermath of the battle. Keeping the severed skeletal fist in stasis within a shrine aboard the Phalanx, with every chapter master of the Imperial Fists etching their names into the bones of the relic, a reminder of the Legion's duty to sacrifice for his Imperium.
Discipline, duty, unyielding will. These are the measures by which every warrior is judged. Unarmed, a warrior with these qualities will still find victory, no matter how long or arduous the path. When girded with the sacred armaments of the Adeptus Astartes, such a warrior becomes truly indomitable.
It is not the descent toward the shadow, nor the rise toward the light that makes us superior. It is the endless struggle between the two that greatness of character lies. We are tested, and we do not break. We will never fall.
The loyalist Primarchs of his Imperium are beloved by all, paragons of the potential of humanity. Each Primarch embodies a fragment of the Emperor's might. Though of all the Primarchs a select few are regarded even by their brothers with respect or even adoration, yet there is one Primarch whom was beloved by all his brothers, with only a trifle of exceptions. The noble son of the Emperor who most embodied not only his power, but his very being. Sanguinius, Primarch of the 9th Legion of the Adeptus Astartes. During the scattering of the Primarchs, Sanguinius would land on the radiation-soaked moon of Baal Secundus. Discovered by the tribal people inhabiting the moon's surface, they would adopt the infant Primarch into the people of the pure blood. Within 3 weeks of his arrival, he had grown to the size of a large child, capable of walking and learning speech. By the year's end, he towered over the people of the blood. Uniquely amongst the Primarchs, Sanguinius bore 2 angelic wings that sprouted from his back, the origin of which is uncertain. Some claim them to be a gift bestowed by the Emperor, whilst the more cynical people of his Imperium would claim them to be the result of a mutation born from the radiation endured by his time on Baal Secundus. Though of all his abilities, it would become apparent that the Primarch had the gift to divine the future. Using his visions, immense psychic power, and martial prowess, Sanguinius would lead the people of the blood to defeat vast hordes of mutants which threatened their lives. With their defeat, the people of the blood would worship Sanguinius as a god, which would endure until the arrival of the Emperor. Disguising himself, the Emperor would witness Sanguinius give an impassioned speech to his people. Yet with Sanguinius' ability to divine the future, he would instantly recognize the Emperor. The great angel would fall to his knees and pledge his allegiance to his father. Inducting the greatest warriors of the people of the blood, the Emperor would integrate them into the pre-existing 9th Legion of Adeptus Astartes, soon to be monikered the Blood Angels. Sanguinius would become highly regarded by all the legions of the Adeptus Astartes, even gaining the greatest respect from his brother Primarch, Horus, whom would confide in the angel for advice. More than any Primarchs, Sanguinius and Horus would form a bond of trust and adoration. The Great Angel would even convince Horus to change the name of his legion from Lunar Wolves to the Sons of Horus after being given his new title of War Master. With Horus even concealing his knowledge of the flaw within the Blood Angel's gene seed from the Emperor, making these events all the more tragic considering the way in which the future would unfold. Horus would fall to the forces of chaos and begin his campaign with the keen awareness that Sanguinius was arguably his most deadly foe. Before his treachery had been revealed to the Imperium, Horus would command Sanguinius to fight the Xenos Nephilim species on the planet of Cygnus Prime. The Blood Angels would be ambushed by hordes of demons within the Cygnus system and become stranded. During a fierce battle against the greater demon of Khorne, Ka'Bandha, both of Sanguinius' legs would be broken. The Great Angel would be comatose due to a psychic backlash caused by the activation of the Rage Fire, a device constructed by Fabius Bile of the Emperor's Children and employed by Erebus of the Word Bearers. The device would cause the gene seed curse of the Blood Angels, the Black Rage, to erupt. With their Primarch unconscious, the Blood Angels would tear each other limb from limb. With the intervention of the Ninth Legion's librarians, Sanguinius would be restored. Battling the greater demon in a second duel, Sanguinius would slay Ka'Bandha and banish it into the Warp. With the demon's leader banished, Sanguinius led his forces into the Chaos Fortress on Cygnus, known as the Cathedral of the Mark. Therein, Kyrus the Perverse, Keeper of Secrets and Demon of Slaanesh, would offer to cure the Blood Angels of their curse, should Sanguinius sacrifice himself unto the Rage Fire. Sanguinius decided to accept the bargain, but before his pact would become binding, Blood Angel Apothecary Meros would sacrifice himself before his Primarch could act, transforming him into the Red Angel. Enraged, Sanguinius would slay Kyrus and swear vengeance upon Horus for the loss of his noble son. Reeling from the catastrophic events of Cygnus, Sanguinius would set course for Terra. His journey altered by a ruin storm orchestrated by Erebus would make communication and travel throughout the Imperium near impossible. His legion would arrive on the Ultramarines' homeworld of Macragge and meet with Primarch Roboute Guilliman. Fearing Holy Terra to be lost, reluctantly Sanguinius would accept the title of the new Emperor Regent of the newly founded Imperium Secundus, with the support of Lionel Johnson and Guilliman. Plagued by prophetic visions of his death at the hands of Horus, the Great Angel would be confronted by the stowaway Primarch Konrad Curze. Confirming his own visions of the Angel's death, Curze would inquire as to why Sanguinius still remained loyal to the Emperor, with the knowledge that it would lead to his demise. Sanguinius urged his brother that it was not too late for him to return to the Emperor's grace. Curze would state that chaos was all there would be, not just for himself, but every man, woman and child in the coming future. Setting off an explosive to mask his escape, he would eventually be recaptured by the Lion. Sanguinius would preside over Curze's trial and would eventually determine to end his life. The Lion would demand to instead become his jailer. Curze believed his death would come at the hands of an assassin sent by the Emperor, which the Lion deduced meant that their father still lived. The Primarchs would pool their resources and attempt to breach the ruin storm. Sanguinius would suffer the beginning stages of the Black Rage, fueled by the visions of his own death. A preternatural vision would lead Sanguinius to travel to the planet of Davin, the world in which Horus began his path of corruption to the forces of chaos. The Primarchs would find evidence of a mass drop pod assault on the planet's surface. Sanguinius, Guilliman, the Lion and their prisoner Konrad Curze would discover a ruin, the Temple of the Serpent's Lodge. Inside, they would find the altar wherein the fell ritual had been conducted by Erebus on the War Master. Their presence would trigger warp storms to bellow forth and create a portal, dragging Sanguinius away from the temple. He would see himself on the surface of Terra in a vast beautiful garden within the Imperial Palace. With his brother Lorgar's corpse at his feet, he would observe the remaining traitor Primarchs bound in chains. His father the Emperor congratulating him on his victory and bestowing the title of the Emperor's Regent to his son.
he would lead a campaign to purge the galaxy of the remaining traitors to his Imperium, and eventually become the ruler of the galaxy. Sanguinius would see through the deception of the vision and cut through the visage of the Emperor, revealing it to be the demon known as Medael. Sanguinius and Medael would duel, Medael unleashing lesser demon hordes through the portal, preventing the Lion and Guilliman from breaking through to aid their brother. Overpowering the angel, Medael would bargain with Sanguinius. Deeming Horus to be an unworthy vessel of chaos, he would offer to aid Sanguinius in killing his brother and taking the mantle of War Master for himself. Added to the bargain, Medael would cure the Blood Angels of their curse. Refusing, the Great Angel would impale the greater demon with his weapons, the Blade in Carmine and Spear of Telesto. With the demon's banishment, the temple collapsed, and Davin would crumble. In its place, a breach in the Warp Storm would appear, leading directly to Holy Terror. The Alpha Legion would blockade the breach, with Guilliman and the Lion distracting the 20th Legion, allowing the Great Angel to pass through. Taking Curze as his prisoner, Sanguinius ventured through the breach. Once through, Sanguinius revealed that he would release Conrad Curze, sealing him within a stasis coffin and jettisoning the Primarch into space. Knowing it might be millennia until his brother would be found, Sanguinius would tell him that fate would catch up with him eventually. Perhaps the Night Haunter's vision of the death at the hands of the assassin may well come true. Arriving on Terra, Sanguinius would meet with Rogel Dawn, Jaghatai Khan, and Malcator the Sigillite. The assembled defenders of Holy Terror would strategize on how to combat the oncoming forces of chaos. The Great Angel's arrival would also be used as a symbol for the Imperium to rally behind. His deific visage boosting the morale of the soon-to-be-tested defenders of the throne. His visions would show him the events of the battles from the perspective of his traitorous brother Primarchs. As the months of war waged on, Sanguinius believed that the defenses would soon falter and that he must confront his destiny in battling Horus directly. Leading the final defense of the Imperial Palace, Sanguinius would battle the reborn Greater Demon of Kabanda, banishing it once more. Injured from this battle and weary from his vigil, Sanguinius would then board the vengeful spirit at the side of his father and Rogel Dawn. Separated from the Emperor, Sanguinius would face Horus Lupercal alone. Attempting to redeem his brother, the Angel would remind Horus of their past friendship, but Horus would refuse to listen. The two would battle, with Sanguinius landing only a glancing strike on Horus, creating a dent within his mass of ceramite armor. This battle would enmesh itself within the Imperium's history as its darkest hour. The War Master would wound Sanguinius with the blades of the Talon of Horus, and end his life with a psychic barrage, ensuring the Angel's death would be the most painful and malicious ending that his benefactors of chaos could administer. With the intervention of the Emperor, Horus and his rebellion would be destroyed. The Great Angel's body would be taken back to Holy Terror by Rogel Dawn, and with the heresy over, Sanguinius would be laid to rest within a resplendent golden sarcophagus, later interred on his homeworld of Baal.
And so it was that they fought, the angel and the beast. Titanic must have been that struggle between those two gods amongst men. Long must they have rained blows upon one another until it seemed that the life of the universe itself hung in the balance. Yet, Sanguinius was bested. Even as the blade of death waited to strike him, Sanguinius would not turn from the path of light. Thus, it was that Sanguinius passed from this world. He who was everything a man should be was taken from us by the darkness. 1,000 times 1,000 years of lamenting will never atone for our loss. When the armor of your faith is buckled and torn, see in your mind that magnificent hero. Think upon his deeds and be humble, for his like will never walk the galaxy again. Rest. We were not made to rest. We go on, unflinching, unstoppable, unending in our strength. The Emperor did not make us for such mortal concerns as hearth and home. Vanity or contemplation? We are his engines of war, his hammers, beating out the fabric of existence into a vessel fit for mankind to inhabit.
Many of the Primarchs of the Imperium are adored for their benevolence, but not all exhibit the traits of grace or kindness. Though the traitor Primarchs particularly are remembered for their bloodlust and cold demeanor, there is one true son of the Emperor whose commitment to the Imperium's ideals were ironclad. A Primarch whom, should he achieve his goals and duties without fault, would care not how the subjects of the Imperium would see him. A taskmaster and courageous leader, this Primarch led his legion as a harsh but fair commander. Primarch of the 10th Legion, Ferrus Manus. As the sons of the Emperor were scattered throughout the stars, Ferrus Manus's pod would land on the feral world of Medusa, impacting on the highest mountain, Karashi, the ice pinnacle. The capsule shattered the mountaintop, burying itself deep into the ice. Medusa's surface collapsing, reforming and shifting with the arrival of the Primarch. Growing in solitude, Ferrus would inspect the markings on his pod embossed with an X. Realizing it not to be native of the world, Manus would further examine runes and electroconductive stalagmites within the chamber in which he lived, his interference awakening a colossal biomechanical worm that lay dormant beneath the chamber, and after a futile effort to fight it, Ferrus would watch the creature escape and destroy everything within its path. The young boy would swear that one day it would die by his hands. The boy would then observe the world outside, seeing humans in the distance but remaining hidden from their gaze. As years passed, the clans of Medusa would discuss sightings of a strange boy, being dubbed names by the many sects and groupings of inhabitants such as the Cataclysm, the Hunter, the Finality, and the Son of Man. More years passed until the Primarch was fully grown. Unscathed from living isolated within the mountain's core, Manus would not join with the clans of Medusa, instead seeking challenges on the planet to test his might and resilience. Slaying many ferocious beasts would prove his raw strength, culminating with his battle against the great silver worm, Asirnoth, the metallic beast which he had vowed to destroy. Impervious to conventional weapons, Ferrus would drown it in a river of magma, its flesh melting and fusing with the Primarch's arms, imbuing the Primarch with his legendary necrodermis-coated arms, with which his future legion would make their namesake. Returning to the clans and tribes, Manus would divulge his knowledge of technology, advancing their stunted civilization and allowing Medusa to prosper under the rule of his iron grip. Though the clans would fight amongst themselves, Ferrus would never intervene, seeing the competition wrought by their infighting to be healthy for their continued improvement. With the arrival of the Emperor, Manus would test his father through battle, leveling entire mountains as they fought. Manus would relish the test of his strength, and willingly bend the knee to a warrior worthy of matching his power. Assuming command of the 10th Legion, the Iron Hands would stand obediently at their father's side, for soon they would be needed to fight the Emperor's great crusade. Fulgrim would be one of the first Primarchs to meet Ferrus Manus. Initially, Manus would show disdain for his brother, seeing him as a foppish artist wasting time on culture whilst the reclamation of the galaxy was at stake. Fulgrim would jokingly refer to Ferrus as the Gorgon, a mythical Terran creature renowned for its ugliness and ability to turn men into stone. The moniker would resound throughout the Imperium as fitting for the Primarch of the Iron Hands, the Legion bringing untold thousands of planets into compliance due to their Primarch's remorseless and relentless drive to fulfill the will of his Emperor, purging every weak link in his chain of command or non-compliant world in pursuit of strengthening the Imperium. Fighting alongside the Emperor's children on many occasions, such as the compliance of the human Disparec civilization, the two legions would forge tremendous bonds of trust and friendship, despite their unlikely contrast as warriors. Fulgrim had even boasted that he would create the perfect weapon to wield in the coming Great Crusade. As a master craftsman, the Gorgon would not let such a boast go unwarranted, and decided that they should compete to craft the finest weapons. Manus forged a sword known as Fireblade, its edge able to ignite are like to that of the Emperor's own weapon of choice, with Fulgrim forging the mighty warhammer Forgebreaker, a weapon capable of leveling entire mountains. The two would see their brother's craftsmanship as superior and concede defeat, and in an act of respect and solidarity, exchange their weapons. Their bond as brothers now complete. However, during the Horus Heresy, their kinship would be tested and tragically torn asunder. Fulgrim would be lured by the temptations of chaos, and before the beginning stages of the heresy, would try to persuade Ferrus Manus to join his cause. Enraged at even the suggestion of such an act, Ferrus attacked Fulgrim, a short duel wherein Ferrus would break Fireblade, mirroring the breaking of the bond of their brotherhood. Due to a hesitation to kill his brother for his treachery, Fulgrim would take the opportunity to strike Ferrus unconscious and claim his own creation, Forgebreaker. The Gorgon's elite honor guard of the Morlocks would be ambushed and killed during the deception, injuring their captain Gabriel Santor, letting him watch the betrayal unfold. Gaining consciousness, Ferrus Manus would resolve to enact his revenge on his traitorous brother. Departing with all haste, the Gorgon would lead a charge of loyalist legions to destroy the traitor forces before their armies could engage the wider Imperium. With the aid of the Salamanders, Raven Guard, Night Lords, Iron Warriors, Word Bearers, and Alpha Legion at his command, they would quash the traitor legions of the World Eaters, Death Guard, Sons of Horus, and Emperor's Children with overwhelming force of numbers. The battle would take place on Istvan V, with the loyalist initial waves of Vulcan, Corvus Corax, Ferrus Manus and their respective legions engaging the traitors. With victory assured, should their loyalist inbound legions be at their side, their trust in their brothers would be misplaced. As the second wave descended upon Istvan V, they would show their true colors. With the strength of 8 traitor legions, they would crush the loyalists. Istvan V was no longer a battle, it was a massacre. In an act of desperate defiance, Ferrus Manus would command his men to kill as many Emperor's children as they could. The Gorgon would face his brother Fulgrim again in battle, but this time only one Primarch would survive. Ferrus wielded Fireblade, reforged by his hand for one purpose, to end Fulgrim's life. Fulgrim would fight with the Leia Blade, a demon-infused sword which would aid Fulgrim's strike, cutting the head from the Gorgon's neck. With news of Ferrus Manus' death, Roboute Guilliman of the Ultramarines would grieve at the loss of his most favoured brother, with even Horus Lupercal claiming the Gorgon's skull and rambling to its facade, confiding that he lamented Ferrus's choice not to stand by his side during the Great War to end the Imperium. Though later in the heresy, in a final act of defiance, Manus would be reborn during the Battle of the Webway by the Emperor himself, fighting alongside the fallen heroes of the Imperium as a blazing spectre against the demonic hordes. The skull of Ferrus Manus would be returned to the Iron Hands. To this day, it rests upon the altar of the Eye of Medusa, guarded by the chapter's stalwart Hellfather.
They are not my hands. This fact is forgotten by my brothers. Inexplicably, it has always seemed to me. The hands are strong, to be sure, and have created great things for us all, but they are not mine, and that counts for something. They forget that the silver on my arms comes from a beast that I vanquished. It is the mark of a great evil that I ended, and yet it persists within me. I would struggle to remove it now. I will not remove the silver from my flesh because I have learned to depend on it. The fault is with my mind. I rely on the augmentation given to me by my metal gauntlets, so much so that the flesh beneath them is now little more than a distant memory. A day will come when I will strip it from me, lest I lose the power to master myself forever. Already my legion's warriors replaced their shield hands with metal in my honor, and so they are too learning to doubt the natural strength of their bodies. They must be weaned of this practice before it becomes a mania for them. Hatred of what is natural, of what is human, is the first and greatest of the corruptions. So I record it here. When the time comes, I will strip my hands of their unnatural silver. I will instruct my legion to recant their distrust of the flesh. I will turn them away from the gifts of the machine and bid them to relearn the mysteries of the flesh, bone, and blood. When my father's crusade is over, this shall be my sacred task. When the fighting is done, I shall cure my legion and myself. For if fighting is all there is, if we may never pause to reflect on what such devotion to strength is doing to us, then our compulsion will only grow.
The warrior who acts out of honor cannot fail. His duty is honor itself. Even his death, if it is honorable, is a reward and can be no failure. For it has come through duty. Seek honor as you act, therefore, and you will know no fear.
The loyalist Primarchs are beloved by all subjects of his Imperium, though only some are venerated as true paragons of virtue, their legacies enduring as symbols of sacrifice, honor, and conquest. Yet there is one Primarch whom epitomizes the Emperor's will more than any of his brothers. An empire builder, patrician statesman, and valiant warrior. A man of indomitable will, cold reason, and preternatural intelligence. Primarch of the 13th Legion, Roboute Guilliman. As the infant Primarchs were scattered amongst the stars, Roboute Guilliman would land on the planet of Macragge. A robust civilization with its own laws and governing bodies, the young Primarch would be found by a group of noblemen within the sprawl of a hunting ground forest. Discovering a glowing capsule surrounded by an aura of light, the nobleman would bring the child to Connor Guilliman, one of 2 governing consuls whom ruled Macragge. With the arrival of the infant, Macragge's populace had reported several oddities and strange tidings that befell the planet. Connor himself had dreamt of the Emperor of mankind. In his dream, he walked to the foot of Hera's Fall, within the valley of Laponis. As he awoke from his slumber, the nobleman would bring the child to Connor. In light of the strange phenomena and his own visions, Connor would adopt the child, naming him Roboute, translated from Macragge's dialect as Great One. With the help of Connor's seneschal, Tarash Ayutin, Roboute would grow into a wise and courageous man. At the age of 10, he had mastered the finer points of history, philosophical contemplations, and science, surpassing even the elders whom had mentored him. As a military commander, his strategic mind was unmatched. In light of this, Connor Guilliman would grant his son command of an expeditionary force that would venture into the Illyrian region of Macragge, a mountainous region to the north, the wilds of which were home to wild men, which harassed the city's populace. As the campaign waged, Guilliman would occupy various shrines throughout the region, forcing the hand of the Illyrians to engage his forces on his terms, to which Guilliman would challenge their chieftain to single combat. Using only defensive blocks and parries, Guilliman would exhaust his opponent, and when the battle had ended, Roboute would gift the chieftain with a prized relic that the people of Macragge's past had stolen. Preventing unnecessary losses of life, Guilliman's acumen would win over the wild men of the north, whom relented in their attacks on the populace of Macragge. The people were safe, and the Illyrians would never harm them again. Yet as Roboute returned to his capital, he found his home and his people in a state of chaos. Connor's co-consul, Galen, had incited a coup to overthrow the Guillimans and seize control of Macragge for himself. Watching Galen's army sacking the city, Roboute instructed his men to secure the capital whilst he ventured to the House of Consuls and lifted the siege. On his arrival, he would find his adoptive father fatally injured, and with Connor's dying breath, he would tell his son of Galen's betrayal. Roboute would reveal Galen's treachery to the assembled governing administrators, and amid a wave of support from the populace, would become the sole consul of Macragge. Now the most powerful man on Macragge, Roboute would enact his father's vision to change it into a meritocratic government and would purge the populace of the conspirators whom had followed Galen's orders. Unbeknownst to Roboute, his true father, the Emperor of Mankind, had been observing his actions since the battles fought between his armies and the wild men of the Illyrian region. From the neighbouring planet of Espandor, he would observe but be impeded from contacting Macragge due to rampant warp storms which embroiled the system. 5 years would pass until the storms would subside, and the Emperor would venture to Macragge personally to meet his son. Within the lapse of time, Macragge now stood as a bountiful planet that was self-sufficient, prosperous, and equipped with both a strong military and abundant trade networks. Roboute would bend his knee to join the Imperium. Impressed with his son's prowess as a ruler, the Emperor would relocate the 13th Legion's forward base to Macragge and give Guilliman command of his legion, now renamed the Ultramarines. As the Great Crusade waged, the Ultramarines would prove to be one of the most effective legions in bringing in planets under compliance. With exception to Horus Lupercal's Lunar Wolves, no other Adeptus Astartes legion would conquer as many worlds, as fast, and with such a rate of compliance during the Crusade. With each conquered world, Guilliman would not leave until the planet's people had a robust means to defend themselves, technologically flourish, enact trade, and govern effectively within the Imperium. For Guilliman, the well-being of the world's people was of utmost importance. Macragge would be overhauled with the insight of Guilliman's hand-picked advisors, bolstering itself and its surrounding planet's military and enabling a constant flow of new recruits to join the Ultramarines Legion. Combined with the Legion's rare casualty rate due to Guilliman's tactical genius, the 13th Legion grew into the most numerically superior of all the Adeptus Astartes legions. The Emperor would value the Ultramarines' vast numbers and utilize them often as his personal hand of judgment, with his most infamous decision being to order Guilliman and the Ultramarines to accompany himself to confront Lorgar Aurelian, Primarch of the Word-Bearers, on the Imperium-compliant world of Monarchia. Used as a hammer blow to shame the 17th Legion, the Ultramarines would oversee the destruction of Monarchia. The idolatrous inhabitants led astray by Lorgar, the Emperor would purge the planet of worshipping his likeness, to which Guilliman would forever feel discomfort for his legion's involvement, the result of which would lead to the Ultramarines' greatest betrayal. With the Horus Heresy making its crucial first steps, the War Master would command the Ultramarines to station their forces within the Viridian system at the planet of Calth. During a joint operation to build trust and cohesion between the Ultramarines and Word-Bearers, Lorgar's men would launch a surprise attack and cause devastating losses to the 13th Legion. Lorgar would attempt to assassinate Guilliman with the use of demon forces and jettison Roboute into space without a helmet. Guilliman would fight the Word-Bearers in the vacuum of space and reboard his ship. Commanding his men to counterattack Lorgar's forces, he would end the battle by confronting Khor Pharaon, the Dark Cardinal of the 17th Legion. Offering Roboute to join the forces of Chaos, Roboute would respond by ripping one of the hearts from the first captain's chest. Reinstating the chapter's Librarius, Guilliman would return to Macragge with all haste, finding the planet under attack by Primarchs Lorgar and Angron of the World Eaters Legion, a battle that would be known as the Shadow Crusade. Joining forces with Sanguinius and his legion of Blood Angels, the Loyalist Astartes would engage the traitor forces, attempting to destroy the Ultramar system. Driving the traitors from Ultramar, Guilliman would pursue the Word-Bearers and World Eater forces to the homeworld of Angron, Nuceria. As the three legions clashed, Guilliman would face Lorgar Aurelian in single combat. Observing his brother to be empowered by chaos, Guilliman would match his brother's attacks until Angron's intervention. As the two traitor Primarchs fought Guilliman, he would be overwhelmed. Yet before being cut down by the Red Angel, he would be saved by his valiant sons, swarming the Primarch of the World Eaters as the Ultramarines retrieved their father. Tending to his wounds, Guilliman and his legion would be cut off from the wider Imperium by the Ruin Storm. Fearing that the Imperium had been lost, Roboute would found the Imperium Secundus, creating a secondary empire to act as a contingency. Refusing the title of Emperor of this new Imperium, Roboute would look to his brothers, whom had likewise been stranded by the Ruin Storm, naming his brother Sanguinius as Emperor's Regent. Imperium Secundus would be plagued by the actions of Konrad Curze during its founding, orchestrating suicide bombings, terror attacks, and raids on Macragge's populace. With the intervention of Lionel Johnson and his Dark Angels Legion, Curze would be brought to heel, though not without friction between the Primarchs and their methods of rooting out the Night Haunter. With Curze captured, The three Primarchs would attempt to breach the Ruinstorm and aid in the defense of Holy Terra, due to the Nighthaunter's visions, giving credence to the Emperor and his Imperium's continued survival. Venturing to the world of Davin, Roboute, the Lion, and Sanguinius would attempt to uncover truths pertaining to Horus's betrayal from the world with which his path of corruption had begun. Upon arriving on the planet, the Primarchs would discover the temple with which Horus's body had been claimed by Chaos. Sanguinius would be dragged through a warp-spawned portal, and demons would spill forth, preventing Guilliman and the Lion from aiding their brother. As Sanguinius bested the demon Medeal within the portal, the temple would collapse. The three Loyalist legions would evacuate Davin and destroy the demon-spawning planet with cyclonic torpedoes, destroying the anchor point with which the demons traversed into the material realm. With the planet's destruction, a breach in the warp storm would appear, leading directly to Holy Terra. Yet Horus would foresee this development and send the Alpha Legion to blockade it. Guilliman and the Lion would distract the 20th Legion, while Sanguinius would traverse the breach, facing his destiny in the defense of Holy Terra. With his path to Terra lost, Guilliman and the Ultramarines would never reach its sacred soil during its time of greatest need. With all haste, Guilliman would travel to Terra and force Horus Lupercal's hand in ending the war by attempting to kill the Emperor, before the 13th Legion could add their might to the Loyalist defense. Arriving on Terra, Roboute would discover his father's wounded body interred on the Golden Throne. Absent from the final assault on the Imperial Palace, Roboute now commanded the most powerful legion within the Imperium. The Ultramarines spared the decimation endured by the other legions. Given the title of Lord Commander of the Imperium, Roboute would deploy his legion in the subsequent years to aid in the reclamation of planets enthralled by the forces of chaos and rebellion. Roboute would draft the Codex Astartes and limit the size of the Loyalist legions to prevent any from following in the path of overwhelming might first abused by Horus Lupercal and his traitorous brothers. Guilliman would also venture forth to bring his brother Primarchs, whom had betrayed the Imperium, to justice, killing Primarch Alfarius of the 20th Legion on the planet of Escrador, and eventually facing Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children during the Battle of Tessala. Facing the reborn Demon Prince, Guilliman would be greatly outmatched by his corrupted brother, resulting in him being mortally wounded by Fulgrim's poisoned blade. As the Demon Prince of Slaanesh retreated into the Eye of Terror, Guilliman would fall into a coma, tended by his legion's apothecaries and interred inside a stasis field. For 10,000 years, Roboute Guilliman would lay dormant as the Imperium of Man corroded and fell to ruin as he slept, though one day he would awaken and avenge his Imperium.
I am the fist, clenched tight in ceramite, smashing with the force of a legion. I am the blade, awaiting my foe's flesh, as keen as the Emperor could make me. I am the bolt, fired from afar, fleet and true, an end to all who stand before the Imperium of Man.
You have suffered, I know this. You have come to the Abyss, and almost surrendered yourselves to it. That changes now. I am Father, General, Lord, and Mentor. I shall teach you, if I can, and pass on the knowledge I have gained. Honor, self-sacrifice, self-reliance, brotherhood. It is the Promethean creed, and all must adhere to it if we are to prosper. Let this be the first lesson.
The loyal Primarchs of his Imperium symbolize the pinnacle of humanity, imbuing their legions and the subjects of their homeworlds with their most cherished traits: honor, valor, sacrifice, duty, and loyalty. Though of all the Primarchs of his Imperium, only one symbolizes the virtue of empathy. A Primarch whom would cherish the subjects of his Imperium. Despite enduring great suffering, he would endeavor to protect his Imperium and his beloved sons. Primarch of the 18th Legion of Adeptus Astartes, Vulcan. With the scattering of the Primarchs, Vulcan's capsule would land on the planet of Nocturne within the settlement of Hesiod. Discovered by a local blacksmith, Labelle, he would name the child Vulcan after the namesake of the first king of the salamanders which roamed the volcanic wastes of Nocturne. Within the span of 3 years, Vulcan would outgrow the stature of all the local peoples. Combining his quick cognitive prowess with the teachings of his father, Vulcan would become a famed blacksmith, renowned throughout the planet. Soon he would impart his knowledge of the forge, inventing and discovering new techniques unknown to Nocturne's populace. Yet Nocturne would be plagued by raiding parties, led by the Dark Eldar. So common were the Drukhari raids that every person of the town had picked out a space to hide to avoid capture. On the 4th year of Vulcan's arrival to Nocturne, a raid would begin. The young Primarch would refuse to hide. Standing at the center of the settlement, he would wait. A large forge hammer in each hand, he would face his despicable foes, alone. Watching this inspiring gesture, the townspeople would stand by Vulcan's side and prepare to defend their home. The Drukhari would be routed decisively by the wrath of Vulcan, felling over 100 Drukhari by his own hand. Hearing of this great victory, the settlement elders of the 7 largest towns of Nocturne would converge to meet with Vulcan and join him in their fight against the raiders. To celebrate his victory, the people of Nocturne would hold a tournament, which a particular stranger to the planet would attend. Adorned in peculiar clothing and pale of complexion, in contrast to the native Nocturne populace, the stranger would ask to be granted a chance to compete in the tournament, claiming that he could best any challenger. The people of Nocturne laughed in his face as Vulcan accepted the stranger's terms, wagering that the loser of the tournament would serve the victor's whim without question. For 8 days the contest would endure. Each challenger tested on feats of strength and endurance, such as the anvil lift, wherein the competitors held an anvil above their heads for half a day. With the dawn of the 8th day, the challengers' scores would be tied. To decide a winner, the 2 challengers would be given 24 hours to craft a weapon and hunt the apex predator of Nocturne, the salamander. The victor would be decided by the size of the salamander with which they had slain. The 2 men would scale a large mountain and split paths. Vulcan would quickly find a massive fire drake and slay it. Carrying his prize over his shoulder, he would descend the mountain. Yet as a twist of fate, the dormant mountain would erupt and cast Vulcan over the side of a cliff. Hanging from the precipice with one hand, the Primarch would not release his prize, but be unable to pull himself to safety. Hours passed, and Vulcan's strength began to wane, until he would be found by the stranger. The stranger hefted over his shoulder a salamander, far larger than Vulcan's. Seeing Vulcan in distress, the stranger would cast his prize aside, tossing the salamander into a river of lava, its body acting as a bridge to enable him to reach the Primarch. Hoisting Vulcan away from the precipice, the stranger would aid him in walking back to the town, his superior prize now melting on the molten rock. Returning to the people empty-handed, the stranger would lose the tournament, with Vulcan declared the winner. Yet to the surprise of his people, Vulcan would bend his knee to the strange man and pledge his life. The stranger, casting off his disguise, revealed his identity as the Emperor of Mankind, now reunited with his long-lost son. Unlike many of his brother Primarchs, Vulcan would not immediately be given command of his legion. For years he would be tutored by the Emperor and fight at his side. Unifying with his sons during their battle against a massive orc horde, joining his son's beleaguered forces, commanding a fleet of 3,000 new recruits he had brought to the fray. The legion's name would be changed from the Dragon Warriors to the Salamanders, honoring the bond forged between the Emperor and Vulcan during their tournament on Nocturne. Vulcan's command of his legion would stand in stark contrast with other Primarchs, the first signs of which involving the 18th Legion's cooperative campaign on the world of Kadatan, alongside the Night Lord's Legion and their Primarch, Conrad Kurz. Disgusted with the means that the 8th Legion used to wage war, Vulcan became enraged when the Night Lords slaughtered an entire city in order to root fear within the planet's populace. Vulcan would continually be scarred by the ravages of war, the planet of Karatan being inhabited by humans coexisting with Eldar Exodites, rejecting the intervention of the Imperium's forces. Vulcan surmised that the humans of Karatan would never turn from their Exodite liberators and would never accept the compliance of the Imperium. Combined with the death of his personal remembrancer, Seraph, he would become enraged, leading to the death of an innocent Eldar child. Racked with guilt, Vulcan would nonetheless order the planet to be cleansed of life, knowing that the human-Eldar coexistence that flourished would never be compatible with the Imperium and its creed. Vulcan's misfortune would continue to grow with his Legion's intervention during the Istvan V dropsite massacre, a full-scale assault of 9 legions sent to quash Horus Lupercal's fledgling rebellion. Commanded by Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, Vulcan and Corvus Corax of the Raven Guard would aid the 10th Legion in the initial assault. Against the combined traitor forces of the Emperor's Children, World Eaters, Death Guard, and Sons of Horus. The battle waged, the Frey Loyalist legions holding their ground until the arrival of their inbound allies of the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Word Bearers, and Alpha Legion. The second wave of legions would turn on their brothers, decimating the Frey Loyalist legions in their ensuing battle. Vulcan's forces would be targeted by the Iron Warriors Legion, firing nuclear missiles into the midst of the Salamander forces, targeting their Primarch. With the fallout subsiding and the battle over, Vulcan would awaken from the blast, his flesh healing itself amongst the ashes of his fallen sons. Vulcan was evidently a perpetual, a being almost incapable of dying. Surrounded by hundreds of legionaries of the Iron Warriors and Night Lords, Vulcan would be stabbed, shot, bludgeoned, and eventually beaten unconscious. Konrad Curze, Primarch of the Night Lords, would relish the opportunity to torment his brother. For months, Vulcan would be tortured by the Night Haunter, dying over and over again. His head cut from his neck, his throat ripped out, his limbs torn from his body and riddled with bolter fire. He would be jettisoned into space and left within the venting shaft of a starship engine. However, Vulcan would rise from death every time. Growing bored of the torture, Curze would utilize the powers of the priests of Davin. They would conjure scenarios within Vulcan's mind. He would face trials destined to fail and watch as the illusory innocents' lives at stake would perish. Yet Vulcan's mind would not break. Tiring of his brother's resilience, Curze would imprison Vulcan within a maze constructed by the Primarch of the Iron Warriors, Perturabo. At its center lay Dawnbringer, the personal weapon of Vulcan, surrounded by the dead sons of his legion, a tempting prize in a futile game. However, after many attempts, Vulcan would reach Dawnbringer and overpower Curze. Using the teleporter device installed within his Warhammer, Vulcan would escape, teleporting to the Ultramar system in the upper atmosphere of Macragge. There Vulcan would burn during re-entry to the planet's surface, knowing he would revive again under the care of the 13th Legion, the Ultramarines. The Ultramarines would discover Vulcan's charred body, and within days the flesh and bone that remained would regenerate. Summoning their Primarch Rabute Guilliman as Vulcan awoke, the Ultramarines would see Vulcan exhibiting signs of mania, incoherence, and mental trauma. Vulcan's time with the Night Haunter had made him sensitive to Curze's presence, and Vulcan knew that his tormentor was near. Konrad Curze would break from the confinement of Lionel Johnson's vessel, the Invincible Reason, and wreak havoc throughout Macragge. Vulcan would escape from his cell and pillage Guilliman's personal armory, setting out to confront the Night Haunter. As the two Primarchs battled, the perpetual human, John Grammaticus, would arrive on Macragge. Armed with the Fulgurite, a concentrated spear tip of pure energy unleashed by the Emperor, Grammaticus would stab Vulcan through the heart, unleashing a massive psychic explosion, killing them both within the blast radius. Vulcan's corpse would be interred within a stasis field, handcrafted by Rabute Guilliman. The remaining salamanders on Macragge would guard their Primarch's body and bring it to the summit of Mount Deathfire on their homeworld of Nocturne. Artellus Numian, Vulcan's loyal son and first captain of the Fire Drakes, would sacrifice his life unto the magma core of the mountain, allowing Vulcan to awaken. His mind and sanity restored by the Fulgurite infused with the Emperor's power. Enthralled by a vision, Vulcan would be led to 2 artifacts he had previously created, but had no recollection of crafting. One such artifact being the Talisman of 7 Hammers. Using the talisman, Vulcan would travel through the Webway and, after many trials, eventually reach Holy Terra. On Terra, Vulcan would be led by the Adeptus Custodes to his father, the Emperor. Trapped upon the Golden Throne, the Emperor would reveal that he had led his loyal son to his side throughout his journey, revealing that the Talisman of 7 Hammers had been created as a contingency to destroy Holy Terra should the traitor forces of Chaos succeed in defeating the Imperium, entrusting its creation to Vulcan as the only son whom would hesitate to use it due to the incredible loss of life that it would cause. Vulcan installed the talisman under the Golden Throne and would defend his father in secret during the Siege of Terra. Soon thereafter, Magnus the Red and a group of his 1,000 sons would infiltrate the Imperial dungeon to confront the Emperor. Vulcan would block their path, protecting his father from a lethal attack from Magnus's staff. The Emperor and Vulcan would bid the Crimson King to return to the path of righteousness, but their offer would be refused. Vulcan and Magnus would duel. Saved from a fatal blow by Salamander Legionnaire Aegon Gargo, Vulcan would wield his fallen son's warhammer in one hand and Dawnbringer in the other, using them to pummel Magnus into submission. In desperation, Magnus would call unto the dark powers of chaos, fully surrendering his soul to the fell powers and retreating into the warp. With the Siege of Terra over and his father wounded during his duel with Horus, Vulcan would leave his Salamander's Legion and venture into the far reaches of space, vowing alike to his brother Primarch Leman Russ to one day return to his Legion in their darkest hour. Over a millennia and a half later, Vulcan would engage the Orc hordes during the War of the Beast. Alone, he would defend the world of Caldera from the Orc invasion, dying over and over again, yet reviving and facing his foes with relentless ferocity. Crafting the Warhammer Doomtremor, Vulcan would rally the Imperium's forces, leading the counterattack against the mighty Orc warboss, the Beast, on the planet of Ulanor. Vulcan would face the Beast, tackling the warboss into a large power generator, absorbing the Orc energy within, known as War. Vulcan would unleash its raw power through Doomtremor, ending the War of the Beast and obliterating himself and the warboss. In the years since his passing, no trace has been recovered of Vulcan, his Legion maintaining that he shall one day uphold his promise when all 9 artifacts of Vulcan have been gathered. Their Primarch shall return.
Ours is a violent calling, but as adherents of the Promethean Creed, we believe in the Circle of Fire. None can come back as they once were, but in death we are returned to the ash from whence we came to be born anew. Our blood and bone bonded with the earth. Through fire are our remains made protean. Through fire and their union with earth do we experience rebirth. After death, after our duty is ended, we give ourselves to these elements, and in doing so, become part of them. This is the nature of the Circle of Fire.
We have no room for hope. We plan and we act. Hope is for dreamers and poets. We have our will and our weapons, and we shall dictate our own fate. The Primarchs of his Imperium are heavily influenced by the planets and circumstances of their upbringing. Molded on death worlds, feudal empires, and oppressive regimes, the Primarchs are akin in the methods in which they shouldered their respective burdens. Though many would resent their brothers' privileged positions, some would bear their struggle with quiet contemplation, and of all the Emperor's sons, a particular Primarch would incorporate his misfortune to forge his own ideals. Primarch of the 19th Legion of Adeptus Astartes, Corvus Corax. During the scattering of the Primarchs, Corvus Corax would land on the moon of Lycaeus.
orbiting the planet of Kievar. The planet was more advanced than most others with which the Primarchs would inhabit. A forge world that gorged itself on the planet's plentiful minerals extracted from the non-atmospheric moon, its harvest mined by legions of slaves. Under the watch of heavily armored guards, the slave labor would consist of criminals, workers who had underperformed on their work quotas, and political opponents of the ruling class. One such slave, Nasturi Ephrenia, would discover the pale infant inside his capsule. The prisoners would raise the child in secret, naming him Corax, translated from Lycaeus' dialect to mean the Deliverer. As the Primarch grew, the slaves would teach him skills to defend himself and eventually fight back against their oppressors. Mastering urban warfare, close quarters combat, and demolitions, Corax would become a fierce warrior. It would also be taught philosophical and political theory. With Corax's accelerated maturation, the slaves of Lycaeus would look to him as a symbol, the soon-to-be savior they had desperately waited for. Corax finally grew to be a fierce leader and began organizing the slave labor force into teams of freedom fighters. With each skirmish, his resistance would amass stockpiles of weapons and conceal caches amongst the camps, orchestrating guerrilla campaigns of psychological warfare, riots, and precision strikes. Breaking the morale of their oppressors and draining their garrisons of strength, the resistance numbers swelled, leading to their final assault. Strategically targeting the Lycaeus Defense Force's security points, Corax would lure Kievar's rulers into a trap. Outmaneuvering the Lycaeus forces with his own battle-forged warriors, Corax destroyed their supply lines and struck the 5 largest cities of Kievar with atomic mining charges. The charges snuck aboard transport shuttles, their detonation crippling Kievar's factories. Unable to construct materials and facing a critical loss of raw minerals, the tech guilds of Kievar collapsed, tearing themselves apart in the incitement of civil war. Thousands died, nuclear warfare cleansing the planet of its corrupt tyrants. And from the ashes of war, millions of freed slaves would celebrate their emancipation, renaming the moon of the Primarch's resistance Deliverance. That same day, the Emperor of Mankind would arrive. Meeting with his long-lost son, he would converse with the Primarch for a day and a night, appointing him the Primarch of the 19th Legion on the condition that the Emperor would bring peace to Kievar. With the aid of the Adeptus Mechanicum, the world would be transformed. The Black Tower, which once housed the tyrannical guards of Lycaeus, redubbed as the Ravenspire. Fortress Monastery of the 19th Legion, the Raven Guard. Unleashed upon the enemies of the Imperium during the Great Crusade, the Raven Guard would prove to be masters of sabotage and strategy, regularly deployed by the War Master Horus Lupercal to conduct covert operations, sabotage, infiltration, and lightning-fast precision strikes. At the Battle of Gate 42, Corax would lose thousands of Astartes within his legion, most of which had been Terran-born. After the battle, Horus Lupercal and Corvus Corax would never see eye to eye. Unable to reconcile their differences, Corax would refuse to allow the War Master to command his forces. The Primarch's continued distrust of Terran-born Astartes had been bolstered, disgusted by their proclivity to enforce the Imperium's will via terror tactics akin to the 8th Legion, the Night Lords. Corax would further hone his legion to uphold their duty to act as liberators of the oppressed, rather than tyrants hell-bent on accomplishing compliance of worlds by any means necessary. Corax would send the remaining companies of his legion that were Terran-born to far-flung regions of unexplored space, further purging his legion's ranks of those not born on Deliverance. Despite this, much to his chagrin, Corax would often be compared to the Primarch of the Night Lords Legion, Konrad Curze. Not only were the two Primarchs similar in appearance, but they also bore striking resemblance in their methods of waging war. Corax would revile such comparisons as much as the Night Haunter, disturbed at the notion his legion were akin to the Night Lords in their use of mass slaughter. During the Carinae Retribution, the two Primarchs would nearly come to blows over their differences. Yet with the intervention of Jago Sevatarian, first captain of the 8th Legion, no blood would be spilled that day. yet rivers of blood would flow from the 19th Legion with the betrayal of Istvan V. The Dropsite massacre of Istvan V would break the loyalist legions of the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard. Led by Ferrus Manus, Primarch of the Iron Hands, the loyalist legions would be slaughtered by the combined might of 8 traitor legions. Despite being severely outnumbered, the Raven Guard would endure. Corax would face Primarch Lorgar of the Wordbearers Legion in single combat, impaling him with his lightning claws, yet be prevented from landing the killing blow by Conrad Kurz. Kurz would injure the Raven Lord, yet Corax would escape the battle, wounded but alive. For the next 98 days, Corax would leave his forces in a grueling guerrilla war. Yet through the cunning and unknowable intent of the Alpha Legion, Primarch Alfarius would allow the Raven Guard an opportunity to escape. Quitting the Istvan system, Corax would command his legion to return to Deliverance, whilst he would travel to Holy Terror to seek counsel with the Emperor. The Emperor knew that the 19th Legion, decimated by the Dropsite massacre, was now unable to provide the much-needed force of arms to defend the Imperium. Providing Corvus with a psychic vision, the Emperor would show his son the location of a laboratory which housed the infant Primarchs and held stores of their genome. Enduring through the laboratory's defensive system, known as the Labyrinth, Corax would succeed in his task, retrieving the Primarch genomes and entrusting them to his newly appointed Chief Apothecary, Vicente VI. Implanting the genome into fresh recruits, with the aid of Mechanicum Genitor Nexin Orlandrias, Vicente would succeed. 500 war-ready Space Marines would be crafted in a matter of weeks, yet the 20th Legion would show their hand, infiltrating the laboratory with the intent to steal the Raven Guard's newfound technology. Implanting the genome with a virus, the Alpha Legion would corrupt the newest recruits to the Raven Guard, preventing their Legion's recovery. Corvus Corax would utilize his remaining Legion forces to conduct surgical strikes of critical enemy weak points for the remainder of the heresy. Compensating for his Legion's small numbers, Corax would nonetheless aid the Loyalist forces by instigating uprisings within traitor-corrupted worlds, eventually mustering the disparate 19th Legion companies into a united force. When the embers of heresy had finally died, Corvus would comply with the ruling of Rabute Guilliman of the Ultramarines to separate his remaining Legion into chapters. Deciding to end the lives of the mutated sons corrupted by the Alpha Legion and locking himself within the Ravenspire to grieve at their loss. A year later, Corvus Corax would leave the Ravenspire and Deliverance, setting a course directly into the Eye of Terror. Corax would exact his revenge for his fallen brothers Ferrus Manus, Vulcan, and the Imperium of Man itself. With exposure to the warp, Corvus Corax would be mutated by its strange powers, transforming into a creature of shadow. The being that had once been the Primarch of the Raven Guard would mete out retribution to the traitorous Wordbearers. Engaging in a duel with Lorgar Aurelian, the warp-infused monster would dominate the now demon prince of the Wordbearers. As Lorgar retreated from the battle, Corax would swear to kill his fallen brother, ending his tyranny and absolving his Legion of their shame. His final words to his Legion on the world of Deliverance, a promise to prevent further ruin at the hands of his traitorous brothers. Never more.
The first axiom of victory is to be other than where the enemy desire you to be. The first axiom of stealth is to be other than where the enemy believes you to be. The first axiom of freedom is that justice without force is powerless. Force without justice is tyranny.
This has been a tale of the Great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. Though many of the sons of the Emperor are now lost to the embrace of death or the void of space, hope remains. For even in the darkness of the 41st millennium, the Avenging Sun stands vigil at the vanguard of humanity's domain. Rumors spread of the deeds made by towering demigods returned to the material realm, with each chapter revering prophecies of their Genesire's return. And should each Primarch be reinstated, the Imperium shall cast back the darkness, for it is in their hands alone that salvation may one day be achieved.